When we look at who has access to open space, there are real gaps.
We want more. We want to get bigger.
Voters will decide this fall whether to double King County's Conservation Futures tax levy to fill a funding gap of $2 billion for land preservation.
It's an average cost of less than $2 per month.
Supporters say the levy hasn't kept up with rising home values because of the state's 1% cap on property taxes.
The economy just doesn't support a tax increase.
But opponents argue homeowners already pay enough.
We need to be honest about where this money is going.
Should voters give the green light to acquiring more green space through higher property taxes?
It is not a huge dollar amount. It is doing really good work.
It's a conversation on land conservation, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. King County is asking voters to double the Conservation Futures Tax, or CFT levy, this November to preserve the environment. That would be about $30 more per year for the average property owner. The county says the state's 1% limit on property tax increases has decreased the effective tax rate of the CFT, leaving behind a $2 billion gap for land preservation projects. But opponents say taxpayers emerging from the pandemic are already overburdened, and they have concerns about how the county is managing land it already owns. Advocates say the path to land conservation in King County has become a lot more challenging.
So the faster we can do it, the cheaper it's going to be in the long run.
Heather Ramsay Ahndan is a volunteer supporting the Conserve Our Future campaign for King County Proposition 1, which would roughly double the Conservation Futures Tax, or CFT levy, to protect open lands in King County. To conserve farmland, river corridors, and other green spaces, county residents have agreed since 1982 to pay the CFT, a property tax levy that currently costs the average property owner about $22 per year.
This really is the model for successful land conservation.
Yet while the CFT has successfully helped protect more than 100,000 acres of open space in cities like Seattle and more rural areas too, the county's ability to collect taxes has changed significantly under state law.
And so what's happened over time is that in King County, we can only collect half of what the state had authorized 50 years ago.
Ahndan, who's also the county's Land Conservation Initiative program manager, says with a cap on how much the county can collect each year, as well as a 1% cap on how much a levy can grow annually, the CFT has been effectively shrinking.
So as property values are rising, that also means our purchasing power is decreasing. So every year it gets worse and worse and worse.
And that's a problem, especially when it comes to protecting sites like this one in Glendale, in unincorporated King County near White Center.
This is a 5-acre acquisition that we were able to close on at the end of 2020 using Conservation Futures dollars to fill a park desert. When we look at who has access to open space, there are real gaps.
With a focus on inclusion, King County has found through its Land Conservation Initiative that nearly 500,000 people in the county live outside walking distance, more than a quarter mile away from a public park, green space, or trail. Supporters say Prop 1 would help acquire nearly 65,000 acres to close that gap, boosting climate resiliency, local food growers, and the county's overall quality of life.
There are neighborhoods that do have really good access to open space, and if you're living in one of those neighborhoods, it can feel like you've got plenty of resources. I think it's important to remember that not everybody in King County has that kind of access.
But to Michael Fisette, the CFT simply feels like a governmental land grab.
They don't need more.
Fisette, who wrote the statement against Prop 1 for the ballot this fall, is a financial planner who says King County, which owns 3% of the land, and other public agencies like the Forest Service own a total of over 61% of the land in the county.
It goes back to the nature of government. We want more. We want to get bigger. It never stops unless somebody steps in and says enough is enough.
Beyond Fisette, there's no formal opposition campaign against Prop 1, though back in June, King County Council member Reagan Dunn said no to putting the measure before voters.
And folks are having a tough time making ends meet.
Fisette echoes Dunn's argument that while the increase in the levy works out to just over $2 a month for the average homeowner, tacking on any higher costs at a time of historic inflation and other impending tax requests doesn't make sense.
All these little $2 a month, they sure add up.
Fisette, who lives in Carnation, says as he sees more visible homelessness on King County public lands, he'd like local leaders to take better care of what they have before asking for more.
So, and I just see them buying up more and more property and not maintaining it. Not in the 17 years we've lived there has King County ever come through and picked up a piece of trash. My wife and I are the ones who pick up the trash off the trail.
Fisette knows after 40 years of voters supporting CFT and up against a Yes campaign that's raised more than $167,000 as of early October, he's fighting a losing battle.
I fully expect this measure to pass, but the thing is, somebody's got to speak up.
In his mind, King County needs more housing, not more green space, and he worries more open areas will mean fewer acres to be taxed in the future, resulting in higher costs for property owners.
So the property taxes aren't going up just $2, they're going up more than $2 because of that cascading effect that more property is off the tax rolls.
Now voters will decide in this present-day debate about the future of King County land conservation.
I'm all for open space, but enough is enough.
It's a matter of sort of pay a little bit now or pay a lot more later.
And joining us to discuss this issue further, we have with us Terry Lavender. She has worked for 35 years in King County Conservation, chaired the Conservation Futures Grant Review Committee as a volunteer for almost 20 years. Terry, it's really good to have you here.
Thank you.
We also have with us Todd Myers. He is director of the Center for the Environment for the Washington Policy Center, who joins us as a voice of concern over this measure. Todd, good to see you too.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with you, Terry. I want a brief opening statement, if you will, on this. King County is asking for an increase in the Conservation Futures Tax Levy, the CFT, with Prop 1 on the ballot. Why should voters support it?
Well, I'm very proud to live in King County. We have a great record of conservation with farmland preservation, forest preservation. We're working on urban projects. Cities and nonprofits can apply for this fund just like the county can. I've been a volunteer with the fund since 1992 when it was actually filling shortfalls in the 1989 bond at that point. I think it's a great vision of conserving forest land, farmland, rivers, trails, and also great urban places. So I think it's just really important to make the fund stronger right now while opportunity is still there before these properties are lost. And so I urge you all to support it.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm going to dive into some of those issues as we get in here. But
Thank
Todd,
you.
let me direct this question to you. What are your concerns about this measure?
I have a lot of sympathy for conservation. I've argued for conservation salmon recovery funding at the state level, and I think we need to do actually more spending on those sorts of things. So I have a lot of sympathy for the purpose. My concern, though, is that the way this is implemented doesn't achieve those goals. So, for instance, one of the things that's pointed out in the voters' pamphlet statement is this helps underserved communities. And yet, of the three properties or three projects that they identify in the voters' pamphlet statement, at least, one of them is Cougar Mountain in Issaquah, and another one is the Sammamish Trail in Sammamish, two of the wealthiest communities in King County. And so I think that the way this is actually implemented doesn't end up achieving the goals that are promised, that the voters are being told one thing, but most frequently, and if you look at the map of the conservation properties, where it's done is primarily providing access to wealthier communities in East King County. I have one other concern, which is that it frustrates me, and this is a general concern, which is that the way that we spend money in King County and Seattle is that we waste billions of dollars on sound transit for cost overruns that could go to great projects. There's a lot of work to be done on salmon recovery, on reducing the amount of sewage in Puget Sound and things like that. And yet, when we actually want to preserve important conservation areas, we increase taxes. And I think there needs to be far more discussion about how we're wasting literally billions of dollars when we're raising taxes to get small amounts, actually, relatively, for conservation. And I don't think that discussion is ever had. And I think if we're honest about doing the most for the environment, we need to have that discussion as well.
Okay, there's a few pieces that I'd like to pull out. And let me just talk about the dollars and cents of this with you here, Terry, because Councilmember Dunn on the King County Council brought this up when the council was discussing this measure earlier this year. We're trying to come out of a pandemic. Every dollar counts, and at least for Seattle voters, looking specifically at that, this is one of many tax measures that could be going up significantly within the next year. How do you respond to the critics who might be saying we're getting overtaxed?
Well, this is small. Currently, the median household, which I live in a less than median house, I know a lot of people live in a bigger than median house, it's $822,000.
Would be the median price,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And currently, you're paying just under $24 a year. Mm-hmm. And so this would increase it significantly. I'm not denying that. It increases it up to almost $52 a year. Mm-hmm. But you're still looking at $4, something like $4 a month for conservation that's available to the cities. It's acquisition only for the county, the cities, nonprofits. And not doing it doesn't conserve any property. And so I think it's just a really important measure. And it's not big.
Yeah.
It's a small tax. I don't deny there's lots of other taxes,
right.
But it's a small tax.
Okay. Thank you for bringing up that point. And Todd, I want to make sure I put out a financial question to you too, because there's a lot of inner workings to this. The pro-CFT camp would point out that because state law limits annual property tax increases to 1%, the effective tax rate of the CFT has declined by about 50% while property values have increased. So how do you respond to this idea that CFT hasn't been able to keep up with the pace it needs to maintain to purchase open space in King County?
Well, I think there's lots, like I said, I think there's lots of good projects. And I actually recognize that the cost of this individual tax is relatively small. So I don't disagree with what they've said. Mm-hmm. The problem is that is in context of inflation, of gas prices, of significantly increased taxes at the state level that we're about to hit. Yeah. And again, I think I would be much more amenable to this if I saw government, King County, managing its money well elsewhere. Mm. And again, I think the other issue is that I think this would be worthwhile if the money were going to projects that actually met what is being told to the voters, mm-hmm. right? Like I said, in many of the circumstances where you see the conservation lands is in wealthier communities. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that they're not worth conserving. Sure. There are some good lands out there. But I think you have to be honest about what these lands are, and is this the best way? And should we be raising taxes to get the money rather than doing other things?
Okay. You had a point you wanted to make here.
Yeah, I think the properties that are being conserved, well, first of all, this is our funding source for doing farmland preservation, mm-hmm. for buying development rights off of farmland, and then they remain in private ownership. And this is the funding source we do that with. This is the funding source that buys development rights off of forest land. So the 100,000-acre forest east of Duval has all of the residential rights removed off of it. It's still in forestry. And this is the funding source that does that. Mm-hmm. This is the funding source, the only funding source we have in King County for acquisition for places for conservation along rivers and streams. I happen to live on Bear Creek, and we've bought all kinds of property that is being restored, and I go out and plant trees and all kinds of things. So this is what we have. This is the funding source. And I think there's been a recognition that it historically maybe hasn't always bought properties in lower income areas. And so starting in 2019, we have the match waiver program, which if you meet certain criteria with the application, instead of getting 50% of the acquisition dollars, which is typical for a CFT grant, you can get 100%. So this has bought properties like along the Duwamish shoreline in South Park. It's bought properties adjacent to affordable housing in Des Moines and Shoreline. So I think we're working hard to buy properties where there is a lack of open space. The big purchase on Cougar Mountain recently, which I'm sure you would see is in a rich area, we actually bought it to complete Cougar Mountain, but also because it's adjacent to the park and ride. And we're finally getting a way we can get people out there. Yeah. So,
but it is in a wealthy area.
Why is equitable access important?
I want everybody to have a chance to see Cougar Mountain. And there's no Cougar Mountain in the middle of, I don't know where, but, you know, I mean, well, okay, let's take a look at the one down by the Enumclaw Plateau.
Okay.
Pinnacle Peak. I know it's got a different name. Anyway, and you know, that's in a more low-income area, and we've bought all the land around that, and there's a great trail going up and incredible views of Mount Rainier. So I don't think you can say it's only in wealthy areas.
Okay. Well, no. I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's only in wealthy areas, but there's no doubt. I mean, it is being sold in the voters' pamphlet statement and elsewhere as giving more access to disadvantaged communities. I also don't deny that there have been some examples. But if you look at certainly the history, and if you look at, like I said, the examples that are in the voters' pamphlet, which I didn't choose, the advocates chose, they are in wealthy areas. So I want to be honest about what the program is for and what it is preserving. The farmland preservation, I have some concerns about that, but again, that's not in low-income areas. If we want to prioritize the conservation, or if we want to prioritize access, then let's do that and be honest about what we're doing, rather than trying to tell everybody what they want to hear, when I don't think the program actually works that way.
Can I jump in and shift the conversation, if I could, a little bit here? Because I want to make sure that we talk about climate change, which I think is at the root of all of this. Because I think a big point for the Yes campaign here, Terry, is this is going to help King County confront climate change, importantly, and protect more farms, homes, and roads from floods and landslides. Can you help me out with that point of it? I saw that on the website, and I just want to know, how does that work? What are you trying to get across there?
Well, the more mature forest we achieve, the more carbon sinks. Okay, so a great example of one sort of close to urban areas is Wayne Golf Course in Bothell, which is a great big forest, and that now has carbon credits available off of it. King County is one of the only local jurisdictions in the United States that has a carbon credit program. And so we're working with that to return more money for conservation. They're also one of the only parks districts that's gotten the salmon safe label.
Yeah, right.
So, ask the question again, please.
Oh, just how it helps. I wanted to get specific about protecting homes, farms from floods, landslides there. Could you get into that piece, please?
So we've bought lots of property along the Cedar River that was historically always, routinely flooded. Part of what happens is, so some of them were mobile home or manufactured home parks, and part of what happens is part of the fund goes to relocate those people. And it's very carefully done with them choosing school districts and different things. So just allowing rivers room to move is good for salmon and good for the people who used to live in the way of them.
Right.
I don't know. It's the only funding source we have to do that.
Yeah,
I want to say that that's not true. The Riverbend project, which I think is what you're talking about, was actually funded also by state money.
It was, but it's 50% CFT.
I understand that, but it's not the only. You said it's the only source.
Sorry.
It is not the only source.
It's the only source the county has.
Right. Right. Okay.
There are a lot of projects that get money from the state, from the federal government, from other places, and the justification you have to have is, why is this grant necessary to do those things? Floodplains by design, other state programs that do exactly those sorts of things. So I think it's misleading to say that this is the only source. With regard to climate change, the example that you give, I think, is a perfect example of how politics overrides the science of good decision making. Forests, mature forests, they will absorb carbon until a certain point, and then they start emitting it. The best strategy, the University of Washington, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says that the best strategy for using forests is to harvest them, turn them into houses or other materials, and then restart the process. What the Conservation Futures does is it preserves those forests. Forests have many benefits, standing, right, for habitat, for aesthetics, other things like that. But carbon sequestration is not one of them. And the science consistently says that. And so that's what frustrates me is that I think that a lot of things are used as a justification for when the goal really is aesthetics, or when the goal is really something else, and that they use this. I think that we ought to have more science, not less in this. And again, I support many of these programs, but I think the way that we're doing these things is too caught up in the politics and not enough in the prioritization of science.
Terry, I feel like there's a piece you wanted to say, but please.
Well, the majority of forest land that King County has purchased the development rights off of has stayed in forestry. All of that east of Duval is still in forestry. And a great deal, anything in the forest production district is not off limits for logging. That's not part of what the conservation easement buys. So,
but the example you gave was
the
something
example
different.
I gave was different. That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, anyway, I think that you have to be really picking examples is a hard thing.
Yeah, no, it
because
is.
they all tell different stories. But
And voters will really key in on those things too.
right. And Conservation Futures only pays for 50% of the acquisition of any project.
Right.
So, unless it's a match waiver that we talked about a little earlier.
Yeah.
So, the idea that it leverages state funds, Salmon Recovery Board funds and stuff is a really important component of it. And I agree with you. Every project has multiple funding sources. I was just saying of the funding sources King County controls,
Yeah.
that is the primary acquisition source.
An important piece of this for sure.
Yeah.
I would like to go down another path with you if I could here, Terry, because I look at King County, I look at the surrounding area here. We are very clearly in a housing crisis. I don't think anyone would deny that. When you look at preserving more public lands, just going down this path here, that potentially takes more land out of the mix for more housing that could be built. I'm thinking about this from the perspective of urban planners, from people who live here too, who might be concerned about, wait a minute, if we're conserving more land, then we don't have much that as we need for this housing crisis. How do you balance those two? Because I think that's an important part of this as well.
Sure. And I think the majority of acreage being purchased is in the rural area, the forestry, the farmland, along the rivers, land that might not be the best choice for housing anyway.
Might already
or
be
might
attached
not,
to some
you
of
know,
your-
and wouldn't be available for dense housing under zoning and stuff.
Okay.
In the urban areas, a lot of the properties I've seen a shift, and so many of the properties being purchased now in the urban areas are adjacent to affordable housing projects. And it allows that affordable housing project, if it gets one of these grants, to be able to set aside green space that works for that. And every once in a while there's a gem, Camp Kilworth down by Federal Way, which is a 40-acre piece on the saltwater, a beautiful forested piece. That received a match waiver and was able to be purchased for $1.6 million out of the Conservation Futures Fund. And so, and that's going to be run by the YMCA as a camp for kids. And so every once in a while there's something big like that. But for the most part, that wasn't going to be housing anyway. So I'm not denying that housing is a crunch, but I don't think the impact that conservation has on it is that great. And I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you for making that point. Todd, any thoughts about this? Housing, I know, is always an issue that interfaces with environmental issues.
Yeah, I think there's a mix of circumstances. I think there are plenty, obviously, and frankly, sometimes there's land that you want to conserve because you don't want it to be housing, right? Especially it lows along rivers, and especially the river bend where there was a flooding area. The problem was that there was people living there. So absolutely, there are circumstances where you want to protect those lands and take them out of the possibility of development. But what you're talking about in some of these cases is essentially a parks program. Parks are wonderful, that's great. But King County has been through this already, which is that in 2009, in the economic downturn, it had to give away a lot of its land because they didn't have the money to maintain it. And so that's another aspect of this, is that you have to make sure that land is maintained in a good status and can't just be left. We added a lot of parks in Seattle, and now not all of those parks are usable because they have not been maintained.
Got it. And can we speak to this idea, make sure that King County is taking care of the lands it already has before adding to them, I think is where we're going here?
Yeah. I'm not sure about King County giving away parks. They were parks in urban areas, and King County is not an urban government.
Okay.
That's my understanding, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. So King County, this money buys a certain type of land. It doesn't buy a ball field.
Right.
It doesn't buy active recreation. It buys trails and passive recreation. So just by the very nature of what it is, it's going to take less, yet less resources to take care of it, as you say.
Okay.
There's not going to be that many places where you're going to have a garbage can and and a big facility that needs to be. That's not to say there aren't some.
Sure.
So I don't know. I don't think.
I think
Briefly, please. Yeah.
I think that may be correct. My concern is that we have been through this before in 2009, where King County did say we have parcels that we can no longer manage, and that they did find cities to take them over.
Right.
Management is an important part of keeping these parcels.
Sure.
You can't just grab them and then not have the management. So, since we have been that's top of my mind since we've been through it before. I understand that in many cases there are agreements, like with the YMCA or YWCA, like you said, that manage it, but you have to make sure that those are durable and long term.
Okay.
Right. And
brief
I
thought
think
on that,
part of growth management was putting things where they're best served. And so these parks were in urban areas, as I understand what you say, and they went to the local urban government, which makes a lot more sense as far as maintenance. King County didn't just abandon them. They found another home for them. And
but they were forced to deal with that. But anyway,
that may be
I
part
take
of
your point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of city governments and local governments were dealing with a number of different issues in 2009 for what that's worth. We need to start wrapping up the show. We've covered a lot of really good ground here. Terry, just some final thoughts for voters out there that want to know about this, the CFT.
Okay. It is not a huge dollar amount. It is doing really good work in the county. I'm very proud of our salmon recovery efforts for a major urban county, forest land that's been protected, the work to protect farmland, and also moving towards putting green spaces next to affordable housing and some other issues. So I urge you to support this measure.
Got it. Todd, some final thoughts here, please.
I think you've heard that we actually don't disagree on several things, which is the value of these, and I think we need more funding for salmon recovery and some other things. But I think, first off, that this is our last priority, right? We raise taxes for this. There's a lot of other things we don't raise taxes for, and when government wastes money, I think we don't pay attention to that enough. I would like to see the environmental community spend more time saying, why are we wasting money when it could go to projects like this? But I also think that we need to be honest about where this money is going, what types of projects. Most of the projects are in rural, and that may be good, but I think you have to sell it accurately and tell people what they're getting, rather than trying to be all things to all people, which I think is a lot of how this is sold.
Okay, thank you. Some very good points raised here. I appreciate it, and we will be right back. What are people saying online about the Conservation Futures Tax Levy? One person writes, "There is zero room in my budget for new taxes or inflation-adjusted taxes. No new money until you show excellence with what you already have." Another says, "Seattle and King County workers do not pay state income tax. The money has to come from somewhere, folks, unless you want to live in the equivalent of Mississippi." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next time, Secretary of State appointee Steve Hobbs is in a tight race against Pierce County Auditor Julie Anderson. It's a special election to replace Republican incumbent Kim Wyman, who left to work for the Biden administration. Will Hobbs, a Democrat, be elected to fill her term? Or will voters favor Anderson, a nonpartisan, for the job of elections chief? Hear from both candidates right here on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.